Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Joining us now, we have Kristi Van Ahn-Kjeseth as well as Naomi Blohm joining us. A volatile week in the markets. Naomi, let's start with wheat. Have kind of a whiplash following the market's export ban announcement coming out over the weekend. That meant that we opened with wheat prices, limit up. We've seen some retracement since then. What is driving wheat prices at this point?
Yeah, it's a combination of the global factors, the global fundamentals. Like you said, the India ban got the market just shooting higher for prices. I think technically speaking, though, the July Chicago contract was able to reach the high that it had back in early March, and that was the technical target. Once we hit that price level, traders said, okay, that's good enough. And then they started to see some profit taking, and the sell-off then followed. So we are, of course, still keeping an eye on the Kansas wheat tour, still confirming how small that crop is. The wheat story, I don't think, is over and done with, but for prices to get any higher than where we've been, it would take some sort of additional friendly news. I think right now for the short term, we're going to see wheat prices start to consolidate in a sideways pattern until we hear a little bit more about what's happening with Ukraine. Can we get any exports out of that area? And then keeping an eye on our wheat market yet here in the United States this spring and summer, along with what's happening in Europe.
Yeah, we have to keep that world view. But Kristi, here at home, Naomi mentioned that Kansas wheat tour. We know that the wheat in the plains struggled. At the same time, spring wheat and planting progress, we're having some hurdles there as well.
Yeah, it's been a real struggle to get the crop planted in North Dakota, especially spring wheat. North Dakota is known for their spring wheat. They plant over 5 million acres of it typically in a year. And so right now, when you look at it, we're 17% planted in North Dakota for spring wheat versus 81% last year. And the average is 60%. So there is some delays in there. And you also look at just in general profitability, you're up against a timeline for both wheat and corn. And what is your favorable crop to be planting right now? And I think a lot of producers are saying, let's try and get this corn in the ground. So I'm worried about what you might see with spring wheat. However, there needs to be demand on that. When you talk about lack of the crop, we really haven't seen our export pick up enough to justify that. Basis levels through the Dakotas into Minnesota for spring wheat still pretty poor, meaning that if we have a lack of crop, we do need to see that demand pick up before we can see some major changes there for price movement.
Well, speaking of that planting pace, the USDA showed us farmers made significant progress last week, Naomi, doubling the planting pace. However, we are still behind. So are there still concerns when it comes to that planting pace right now?
And the answer is it's a mixed answer because the Eastern Corn Belt has been plugging away just fine. Parts of Iowa, Illinois, the progress has been exceptional. But two states are still lagging in the planted pace, and that's North Dakota and South Dakota. North Dakota and Minnesota. And the reason that they're important because combined acres, you're looking at 13% of the corn crop is between North Dakota and Minnesota, and 16.5% of our soybean crop is in between those two states. And if you remember on the soybean crop, a good portion of the beans that go to China, that go to Asia, go out the PNW. And so those are beans from North Dakota. So we need those acres to get planted. So when we look at the crop progress report on Monday, yeah, we're going to see that the crop overall is catching up. But for some of the key export market and those states that contribute to that export market, what they say is really critical.
Yeah, and Kristi, just a couple of months ago, we were talking about how farmers were going to do everything they can to plant this year. That is still the case. But ultimately, we're reminded that Mother Nature has the final say. Have we seen that much progress in North Dakota, northern South Dakota, as well as Minnesota? And realistically, what impact could that have on those private plant numbers that we may see?
Yeah, we have not really seen the progress that we've been hoping in those states. And honestly, we work through rain running through here right now. And you look at these markets and you say, when are we going to catch a break? And honestly, there's been areas of southern Minnesota that have gotten rain and they can't get going. It seems like they might dry out and then they get up a pop-up shower followed behind. This weekend is supposed to be really cool, and that is not going to help them dry down. So when you look at where we're at compared to where we've been in the past, 2019 was a really wet year for the Corn Belt as a general, but 2020 was a wet year for North Dakota. In 2020, they only got in 1.95 million acres of corn. Currently, we are forecasted here to have 3.6 million acres of corn in North Dakota. So realistically, if you're saying, hey, this is as wet as we saw in 2019, which our planting pace is behind 2019 at this point, and we're running out of time, you could be seeing that 1.95 million acres or less, along with some changes. North Dakota last year, you can remember just how dire their crop was. They had severe drought. It was horrible to see those pictures, and you really felt for the cattle producers actually out there, lack of fields to graze. And now we have a corn PP plan that you can say, hey, I'll take corn PP behind that. I can plant forage for feed. And so that might actually play a role into what you see for corn acres in North Dakota for those cattlemen saying, hey, I'm going to go ahead and just secure that feed, especially with what we have for costs right now for feed use, to be able to get some of that in there. So I think there's some real concerns. I'm talking to producers. I don't think there's really much for concern yet when you come to soybeans. Soybeans, they have until June 10th to plant, but a lot of producers have been known to go all the way to the end of June planting soybeans, and they've been tolerant of that into the Dakotas, into Minnesota. But you even look at here in central Minnesota, we've started to get rolling on corn planting. We've had some spotty going forward, but really just west of us, we have some very good soil that has been a little bit of a stickler to get into. So if it's tiled, it's great. They're running on it. If it's old sugar beet fields, they're running on it. But besides that, it's been a real struggle. So we'll see what we get for this moisture and how cool it gets. But hopefully we can get back in the ground. But you're looking at not that much further before you have some cutoff dates, before you get docked on that. And when you look around and you see how profitable other things are, especially for the Dakotas, I know I'm hammering on them, but when you look at the Dakotas, sunflower, that is a very profitable crop right now. And honestly, if you're looking at corn that's not able to get in the ground, you already have the fertilizer on that. That might be one. And we already saw USDA dock the acreage numbers for your main crops in the Dakotas into Minnesota. So between Minnesota and North Dakota, there was a huge dock, over 1 million acres of corn out of that situation. So when we're looking at it and you're saying, hey, what do I realistically see? North Dakota has some very profitable levels for specialty crops, and they're able to come in here and kind of diversify their crop if they can't get that corn in the ground.
Well, if we do see farmers make that switch and move to more soybeans just because they cannot get the corn planted, the soybean market does not seem to be noticing, because we saw some significant price increases this week. So what is that underlying factor that's really driving soybeans right now? We'll ask Naomi Blohm later on U.S. Farm Report.
It's time to sign up for the 2022 United Pork Americas Conference in Orlando, Florida. Register today at UnitedPorkAmericas.com and join us September 7th through the 9th.